platforms. So we are connecting now. Just give me a second.
Sure.
So we are okay, Bridget.
Do you want me to just go ahead, Reza?
Yes, please.
We
are
okay.
exactly 11.
Okay, you're leaving it all up to me. All right, here we go.
We are standing with you, Birgit.
Oh, that is so wonderful. I feel really honored in every way. Well, welcome everyone here today, all the speakers from around the world, as we have just seen, and everybody watching live on social media, including Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Thank you, Reza Soltani, for again organizing another great virtual conference, again providing opportunity to discuss important issues in travel and tourism on Tourism Webinar. This time to share insights, thoughts, and yes, if I may say so, also feelings about intimacy and tourism. And thank you, Dr. Talib Rifai, former UNWTO Secretary General, for those who do not know, for once again being present here today. It's always a great pleasure to see you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bridget.
Very importantly, of course, I'm extremely delighted and grateful to all the speakers who have agreed to participate today. Was really delighted that you responded so positively to my request and invitation to participate in this special webinar. Intimacy is such a great topic, isn't it? How could we not have a chat about it? Let's talk about intimacy, if nothing else. So the speakers that will be present here will be, if I just name you list you by name, and then later on I will introduce in more detail. So I start off with the first speaker, who will be Professor Arndt Zischer in Hamburg, Germany. The next one is Sandra, Professor Sandra, and I can never say your surname. Can you say it for me, Sandra? Yeah.
Gutes
M. Okay. I call you Sandra, as I've always done on semester at sea. Professor Chris Ryan, down under in New Zealand. Professor Hazel Andrews in the UK. It's Associate Professor Sebastian Philippe in Hong Kong. And Dr. Xavier Matuti, is that the way I should pronounce it, Xavier? I gave it a go, in Austria. Associate Professor Elizabeth Kastenhaus in Portugal. And Associate Professor Katja Sidali in Italy. Then we have Dr. Michael Humbracht in the UK and Dr. Dimitri Likoudi in Greece. I never asked you how you pronounce it. Likoudi is probably the way to do it. So I'm not far from you, Dimitra. As I said, I am here now on my beloved Naxos. Just moved back here about a week ago and we'll call it home for a while. So it's a very special feeling for me to be back here and have all these guests in my little living room, if I may call it that.
Thank you.
So I'm truly delighted to see you all here and share some intimate time talking about something that is very much of interest to each one of us, if not also close to our hearts. I will, as I said, introduce you later on specifically. As for me, Reza asked me actually, who's going to introduce me? And I thought Reza would do so. There's not much to know about me. You can look it up on Tourism Webinar, and like every speaker we have a bio there, and it gives you some insight into my background. I have worked extensively in industry and also have been in academia. Now I work independently. Now my passion for this topic has been ongoing since the early 2000s, and it's not sort of distinctly different from my PhD, in which I actually focused on motivation and involvement theory. So it's behavioral, cognitive, and affective involvement. So it relates to the notion of intimacy, which explains my continuous interest in emotions. I always make a point that this should be an exciting webinar for everybody watching. And people might think that this webinar, because we are academics, all of us here today, might be just a fest of talking heads. I don't think so. I strongly believe that the topic of intimacy carries a lot of energies beyond the purely cognitive processes, not just for our speakers, but I could imagine also for all of you listening live today, or perhaps at a later stage. And because it is such an intimate topic and it is about emotions, I might suggest that perhaps everyone like to take the opportunity to reflect while listening to all the insights that are being presented today, to tune into yourselves a little. What thoughts come to mind? What memories, what feelings can you possibly nominate? Are any relevant to the experiences that you have now during your travels or in life? Just a suggestion, perhaps you'd like to do that while you're listening. So, well, before we start, just a couple of comments with regard to the technical aspects of today's webinar. Hazel, you asked already, all up, it will be 90 minutes. And each speaker will have around 10 minutes to share their thoughts. Some of you will have presentation slides and some of not. So whatever you feel like is most welcome. The reason I will facilitate the presentation and hope that everything will go smoothly. And if not, if there's any problems, call out, and Riza too on the other side there. As I already indicated, the webinar will be fully recorded and will be made available on the Tourism Webinar website. And just like previous webinars, can be accessed anytime after today. There's also the material provided, like the slides and PowerPoint presentations or anything that someone wants to share is also available on the website, and the extended bio for everyone. Okay, so all up, the webinar might take 2 hours with 9 presentations all up. Again, we will have Q&A, as is always the case with these webinars, right at the end. So anybody listening in or anybody wants to take notes with any thoughts that come up as we're speaking, just do so, and then we can talk about it at the end. So my aim today is to make it relaxed, where we feel comfortable and intimately connected, intellectually and through communication. So the first thing that people have asked me, why the topic of intimacy and tourism, as the heading is. The topic has been very close to my heart, as I said, a long time. And intimacy is a topic that for all of us is very, very relevant, not just in travel and tourism, but in our daily lives. Now, travel is taking off again after COVID, and there's pent-up demand, as we can watch. The airports are flooded with people wanting to travel. So they want to experience and seeking something, whatever that may be. Perhaps it is intimacy. That's something we may explore today. So with that in mind, the webinar, I'm sure, will be of interest to many people, not only those associated with the domain of travel and tourism and academia, industry or government, but everyone who is keen to find out more about the ideas of intimacy. Hence, the invitation to everyone from different backgrounds: sociology, psychology, anthropology, tourism scholars. Everybody has something to contribute from different perspectives. And that's the joy, hopefully, of today's webinar. Another question that came up, someone asked me, how is it that I have special interest in intimacy and tourism? Well, my PhD was in special interest tourism, as I indicated. This particular topic, however, arose in 2003, 20 years ago, when Professor Chris Ryan and I sat together over coffee at a conference. When Chris, I remember vividly, you asking me what new topic could be of interest at a conference. And I said, how about intimacy theory? Wow. So we brainstormed, took notes, and on a napkin, manually writing it down. And we came up and conceptualized a paper published in 2005, Destination Image, Romance and Place Experience, an application of intimacy theory and tourism. So today, the topic of intimacy in tourism is just as relevant and worthy of exploration. With everybody here present today, again, thank you for coming. And the research has advanced immensely, and I'm looking forward to hearing more and more about it. What I will do first up as a speaker I will interview Professor Arndt Tischer. So Arndt, hang in there, please. Tell your boys to wait a little bit more. And we will do a quick interview session. But I also would like to share some of my slides, just to set the scene a little bit, to set the mood, if I may call it that. And I thought I might just do that. Let me just see if I'm successful in doing that. Just a second. Let me just see. Just 1 second here. It's not working yet. There we are. It was hiding. Okay. Okay. This is my little PowerPoint presentation, and as you can gather, it's a photograph taken here at Kastraki on Naxos Island.
And thank you, sir. We don't see your presentation.
Don't you see my presentation? That's not okay. Let me just see. I'll try again.
You just should click on the
Share screen. Can you see something now?
No.
Well, that's interesting. We've tested it before and it worked. Let me just see again. You should see my screen all up.
We can see you.
Yes, that's great. It's something, isn't it? If not, we have to do without it, won't we? I'm pressing just a green button here, aren't I, Riza?
Yeah.
Share screen.
And share a screen or share documents.
I'm doing. Let me just try again. What a shame, it might not want to work. See, I told you I have made a boo-boo.
Yeah.
Share screen and can you see it now?
No.
Nope.
Nope. No, I can hear the noise from everywhere. Okay.
Yes, we can see on we see on screen the tourism webinar.
Okay, well, that's if I have my document open, can you see that at all?
No.
No.
Well, I have a green button here, Isa, and I don't know why that's not working for sharing my slides. We did not test it before. Okay. Well, we'll have to might give that a miss altogether and just start with talking to dear Arndt. Are you there, Arndt? Can you hear me, Arndt?
I'm here.
Hello?
Hello.
I
Yes.
cannot hear you. Okay, great. Before we have a chat, Arndt and I quickly introduce Arndt a little bit more in detail. Now, Professor Dr. Arndt Tischer, often referred to as Germany's #1 brand expert, is co-founder and since 2006, together with Oliver Ericello, managing director of the Büro für Markenentwicklung, Office for Brand Development. Arndt Tischer studied brand and economic sociology in Hamburg and Hamilton, New Zealand, after which he was appointed by the Deutsche Lufthansa in the Strategic Planning Department, a global advertising agency, and the Institute for Marketing in Geneva and elsewhere. Since 2011, Arndt has been a lecturer in brand management at the Lucerne University of Applied Sciences and Arts. Since 2021, he holds the position of Professor of Marketing at the West Coast University of Applied Sciences and Arts, as well as Scientific Director of the Institute for Regional Marketing Research and Consulting in Heide, Germany. So with that introduction, Arndt, may I start by just asking the very cool question. You have recently published a book with the title is Trust, the Strongest Currency, or the World's Strongest Currency. My question to you to start off with, because intimacy is about trust, why do you think trust is the world's hardest currency and relevant to the topic of today, intimacy?
First, thanks for this very kind introduction. I could hear it for hours. Yes, but concerning our topic, the point is, for example, we have a wonderful Zoom meeting here. We can bring together people from 5 continents, and we are able to talk together about a certain scientific topic. That's fantastic, and that's technically advanced, and I still find it very fascinating. But in the moment, I was talking about my kids, in the moment this conference or the seminar has ended, we all go back to our nearest persons, to our loved ones. And it's fascinating that my email can be in San Francisco or Tokyo within 2 seconds. But still, what is really relevant to the people is trust. And as a German professor once said, the most efficient thing to reduce transaction costs is trust. Because in the moment we have persons whom we trust, this is the most efficient connection between 2 persons that we can have. And for example, if I take my topic of branding, what's the job of a brand? The job of a brand is to build trust. And in my business, people always say, oh, emotions are so important. Every brand needs emotions. And I always say, this is great bullshit. The only relevant emotion concerning a brand is trust. If we are successful, and here, no matter if we talk about psychological things or sociology phenomena, in the end, it's all about trust. And by the way, I think we always have to, I remember in New Zealand, we have this honesty boxes. Do we still have this in New Zealand? Yes. Honesty boxes. And we have in countryside in Germany, we have not so nice as in New Zealand, but we have other nice of these typical shops. And speaking of me personally, in the moment when I see such an honesty box where people are not standing there and controlling anything, you just have marmalades or whatever, and we know it's always in the countryside. And why is it always happening in the countryside? It's happening there because there is another social structure and there is another social system of trust. And why am I telling this? Because I have the feeling, for me personally, when I'm in an area where I can see these honesty boxes, I feel very welcome. I feel much more intimate than, for example, going in a supermarket or anything. And why is it? It is because these people offer me some kind of trust without knowing me. I may be a tourist there, but they offer me some kind of trust. No matter what stands behind it, I just want to point out that trust is on one hand a very efficient system, but on the other hand, and this is something maybe for our topic here, it's a very beautiful feeling. It's a feeling that makes us relax. And the moment that we have people around us whom we trust, it's a whole other chance of relaxation that we have. And this, to make it short, the most efficient, the most effective connection between 2 persons is, since thousands and thousands and thousands of years, is trust.
Thank you. I certainly agree with that wholeheartedly. What comes to mind with that one, if I may just ask one more question too, how do you see the concept of trust as part of intimacy? And hopefully I can get my slides going, because I wanted to elaborate on the notion of intimacy, because there's lots of kinds of intimacies, not just the one we mostly think about. How does the notion of trust, both as a value as an emotion, relates to the notion of travel and tourism? What do you see the relevance there?
Yeah. What are we looking for when we are traveling? Normally, we are looking for some kind of connection to another culture, to people of this other culture. And we are looking and we are trying, it's not possible, but we are trying to see another culture from the inside out. Yeah? I'm sure if I'm for the first time in China or Japan or wherever, I will not understand the culture. Nobody in the world can do this. But in our head, what is it that we are wanting? We are wanting to get nearer to this culture, to understand this culture. This is why we travel to places where we are interested in. And we want to get some kind of intimate relationship concerning the place where we go or concerning the people. What kind of relationship or what kind of intimacy we are searching there, this is very individual. Yeah, everyone is searching something else. But wherever we go, by the way, if we have a new job, it's nothing different. We are going into this new job and we are first, what are we doing first? We are looking for people where I think, oh, he or she could be like me. Maybe I could work with them very well. The first thing we look for is to find some people to trust. And concerning traveling, it's the wish to come nearer to some kind of culture or to some kind of people and their cultural background.
Thank you for that. And I think the point you just made is the core of, I think, what I believe intimacy is all about. And I know we talked about it yesterday as well. I'm still a bit sad that I can't bring up my slide because there I actually have the notion that intimacy is so often perceived as physical, sexual intimacy. As soon as the word intimacy comes up, it's a taboo topic. People don't want to talk about it. Even then, people don't feel trusting to even disclose themselves, to share what might be intimate to them. And generally, as I said, what kind of intimacies are we seeking? You just made that point, particularly as we travel, not just on holidays, but as we travel through life. And when we really stop and start to think, what are the characteristics of intimacies, then we can see that it is curiosity and courage. When we travel going somewhere, we need to be curious and courageous. We need to be willing to take risks, to make choices and take chances for anything to change. Honesty and transparency also comes to mind, and I think that's what you alluded to there. The second one I wanted to possibly ask you about, the notion of trust. Do you think there's a relevance to also the concept of care that relates to the idea of trust?
Please explain the concept of care. What do you mean by that?
Well, quite often, I think we live in a world where there's the popularity of mindfulness is actually going on.
Okay.
Self-care comes to mind.
To make it a little bit, I think this whole topic of self-fulfilling, self-mindedness, and so on. The problem within this is, out of my perspective, that it has come. It might not have been always like this, but it has come to something that just surrounds me. It's all about me. Yeah, me doing yoga, to be in the cliche, me finding myself, and so on. But the concept of trust and the concept of intimacy holds something totally different. For sure, we can have an intimate relationship without really being intimate with the other person. I heard of it. I don't know if this happens. But on the other side, as we talk about it, we are always making us naked when we are talking about real trust. We are always making us naked in front of other persons. Not in a physical way, but if we really understand trust in its core, then it's about making us naked in front of other persons. And that's something totally different to the concept that you were referring to in your question. That's, in my opinion, it's a trend. It's a society trend, and it's very important to many people. But I think these people are it's a little bit sad because they only see this concept as a very small concept for themselves. But the perspective of which we are talking is a very, very broad perspective and concerns so much other and so much more fulfilling intimacy.
Right. So again, as we can see already, we can talk for hours. I noticed that yesterday when we were together. The notion of intimacy, I think you again pointed out, there's more to intimacy than what we normally assume, or a lot of people react to when you use that word, is physical and sexual intimacy. And the point that you made is the importance of emotional intimacy, sharing our feelings, our thoughts, being tuned into each other's feelings and also our own. That's why I asked everybody to just sit and perhaps tune into our own feelings. What about intellectual intimacy? We're sitting here together and talking about this intellectually, but also as friends, as colleagues. When we think of travel, I just wanted to bring this in because I couldn't bring the slides in earlier, but what you allude to as well when we travel is we're looking for aesthetic intimacy. We're looking for the aesthetics of a place. We're looking for creative intimacy, sharing and creative acts with other people. Recreational intimacy, of course. What are we doing during our holidays? We participate in activities. How do we share that with other people? That creates intimacy, connection, getting to know each other even through that level of intimacy in recreation and travel and tourism. I think one couple of other intimacies I'd like to allude to before other ones bring other intimacies up, other kinds of intimacies, crisis intimacy, closeness and coping with problems and pain, conflict intimacy, facing and struggling with differences, commitment intimacy, mutually derived from common interests, very important one, communication intimacy, mutual understanding and affirmation. I think these are intimacies that we also need to bring into consciousness of everybody else when we talk about intimacy beyond the physical one. Thank you, Arndt. I think just to conclude, would you then agree that your concept of intimacy is one of self-care and other care that results in mutual care?
I would say it in a sociological way. It results in a kind of community building, in a kind of intimacy within a community. That's out of my perspective the thing, because as I said it in the beginning, the most efficient connection between people or between a group of people is this kind of intimacy. The person behind me, this is the founder of sociology in Germany, Ferdinand Tönnies, once worldwide known. He has written one book that is called Community and Society. So these two different things that we act and get intimate with with persons. And he made it totally clear that whenever we are talking about intimacy, we are talking about our nearest friends, about our community. And that's the strongest thing that cannot be destroyed by digitalization or what. I mean, for example, what do we need digitalization? We need it for getting together with our loved ones, with our intimate persons, no matter if they are in New Zealand or in Hamburg. And this is something we should always have in mind. We are talking about trends, about how this world must be, and so on. But we have to focus on that the strongest thing, even if we want to change something in this world, we can only change it by building trust, or as you would put it, by building intimacy between persons.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Arndt, for your most insightful comments from a sociological perspective. Great start to the discussion, I hope. If you don't mind, I will let you go back to your boys. If you stick around a little bit, it'd be great. I'd like to now actually call upon Sandra, if you don't mind, and bring your psychological perspective into the whole discussion of intimacy. I'll introduce you briefly, if I may. Now, Professor Sandra Scooters-Emsch is a behavioral neuroscience and health psychology professor at the University of San Diego. She also is an affiliated faculty in women and gender studies and ethnic studies. Over 3 decades in higher education, Sandra has taught courses on the intersections of well-being and psychosocial factors. Courses include the psychology of stress, positive psychology, and health psychology. Her research focuses on the role of factors such as spirituality, faith, and stress on health and well-being. Sandra also has a recipient of many awards, including Carnegie Fellow of Political and Community Engagement, Excellence in Experiential Education, and Woman of Impact Award. Now, again, Sandra and I know each other. We spent 4 months just recently together as professors at Semester at Sea, traveling together, teaching our courses. And of course, we had a lot of common ground and lots to talk about. So I'm delighted to have you here today, Sandra, seeing that you're sitting in the States. May I give you the stage and present your thoughts for us? Thank you.
Right. Thank you again, Brigitte, for the introduction. And I hope I make sense because it is 2:30 in the morning here. So I am going to read what my thoughts so that I don't forget anything. But my background is in 2 areas of psychology that are related to today's topic, and those are health psychology and behavioral neuroscience. In the case of health psychology, we use the biopsychosocial model, examining biological systems, psychological processes, and social factors, and how they impact our well-being and our health overall. And as we see, more and more tourism is focused on wellness, focused on relationship building and connection with one's environment, all important factors for our overall health and happiness. This idea of intimacy and tourism becomes an essential focus. Intimacy is widely regarded as one of the key processes governing close relationships. Extensive theory and research indicate that the most gratifying close relationships are those characterized by a mutual sense of understanding, appreciation, and caring. Not coincidentally, people whose social networks possess high levels of intimacy tend to be happier and healthier, whereas the absence of intimacy tends to be associated with loneliness and other forms of emotional distress, and may even lead to deterioration of our physical health. The association between intimacy and emotional well-being is so fundamental that many theorists describe the capacity for participating in intimate relationships as a principal feature of successful personality development and maturity, as well as, we know, social support is a clear predictor of overall mental and physical health. While social psychologists focus on intimacy as it relates to individuals, intimacy can also be explained as it relates to tourism and our connections with cultures and spaces. Understanding the feelings that evoke tourism experiences play a vital role in the tourism industry. Emotional arousal is a major motivator for the buying and consuming of products, hedonistic consumption, adventure, escape, fun, pleasure, and positive and enjoyable emotions. We also know from the research that travel and vacations can provide us with the relaxation and rest that is necessary for our well-being. Travel benefits relate to desirable outcomes of going on holiday or vacation that include health, socialization, and inclusion, feelings of inclusion and involvement. Furthermore, behavioral neuroscience has shown us that our brains are wired to seek out relationships with each other, as this has provided humans with an evolutionary advantage for our survival. Our brain's emotional centers are powerful drivers of motivating behavior, such as seeking relationships and connections with others. Neuroscience is an interdisciplinary field that develops theories and methods in culture and social psychology, anthropology, social and cognitive neuroscience to explore the interactions of different cultures, psychological processes, the brain, and genes. The integration of the research in these 2 areas include the immersion of a relatively new field of research called neurotourism, or the tourism of emotions. Neurotourism has gained importance in recent years thanks to scientific advancements in neuroscience and the use of marketing and neuroscience. These are techniques and tools of two disciplines applied in the tourism sector. The objective is to be able to know what tourists feel during their experience, during their different activities, and when being in contact with others and the culture they're immersed in. We all remember some special moments from our travels, the sounds, the taste, the smells, such as the food that we may have consumed somewhere, the type of wine that we drank in a location, the feeling of the sand under our feet. These are powerful stimuli that produce emotions that then lead us to memories and wanting to connect and feel more of these kinds of experiences. And so this new area is really investigating how can we use our understanding of the brain to then provide the kinds of experiences that produce intimacy and connection and memories that will draw people back into the various locations. And so we see examples of the integration of neurotourism in various areas. So for example, in Arona, they've created for tourists a special atmosphere within their hotels that they do not even need to go to the beach. But rather feel as if they were already there. So they provide them with the visual and sensory stimulation that gives them those feelings and emotion and that spark the emotions that we have when we travel and we participate in tourism. And there's also another area of health tourism that we know that people are now seeking health experiences, particularly in the United States, not only because they can't afford healthcare here in the United States, but also because we are seeing more and more countries providing a holistic experience for people's healthcare in these other countries. So we can see that by understanding the brain and how it works and how cognitive and psychological processes, we can use these tools to help really provide the kind of holistic experience that more people want from their tourism.
Fantastic. Thank you again. I don't know about everybody else, but your summary was spot on and just wonderful to listen to your expertise on this whole topic. Thank you, Sandra, for that. What comes to mind, I don't know about you, anybody else, but we always say and used to say travel is cathartic, it's therapeutic. And I quite often use the term that travel is the latest psychological couch for society. And you just summed it up beautifully. Thank you very much for that. Any other questions? If you might want to go to bed, we might have to collect questions for you later on. I'll certainly get back to you after this is finished, and when you're in Greece, possibly we catch up then anyway. Okay, thank you very much again for that, Sandra. Awesome. All right, with that introduction into psychology, I would like to actually now call on to you, Chris, seeing that your background is also psychology. And with that background, you obviously have done all your research and your work in travel and tourism accordingly. For those of you who do not know Chris, I quickly introduce Chris. Professor Chris Ryan is in Hamilton at the Waikato University. And we go back a long way because that's where I did my master's. And that's where I met Aunt way back. That's 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. Don't give away the age. So we've had the pleasure also to publish some work together, Chris and I. So I'm very delighted that he's agreed to be here present today as well. Chris Ryan is Professor of Tourism at the University of Waikato Management School and Director of 2 research units relating to China, New Zealand tourism research, and second, the impacts of tourism on the community of Raglan as part of SDG initiatives. He is the editor, or has been particularly, he has been the editor-in-chief for tourism management for 25 years and founded Tourism Management Perspectives and Tourism Critiques. As a researcher, he has received several awards and authored or co-authored over 200 refereed journal articles, written 14 books, and has been in advisory bodies for government and private sector companies on several occasions. He's listed on PLS 01 as one of the leading 0.5 global researchers. Chris, the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you very much, Birgit. And now I can share my screen. And yes, excellent. Well, I wasn't sure if the beginning.
Chris, we cannot hear you.
And hopefully you should now. Thank you.
No sound here, if I may say so. Not at my end.
Yeah, we don't hear the video yet.
The record. Yes, there's no sound, Chris. I know there was on the original one that you sent in.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to talk over myself, so hopefully you can hear me. Basically, yes. I have 10 minutes, and this is the outline of my talk. So basically, I have 4 themes. We are as gods, perhaps, but we're also very frail and needy. And we're frail and needy because we are human. And equally, our awareness of our own frailties is, in fact, the secret of our own strength. We are conscious beings, and as such, we are able to, and I'm having to do some other adjustments here whilst I just, okay. And hopefully, technology, as I said, is wonderful, right? And it is the awareness of our own frailties, which is strength. That's a very common experience for all of us, that in fact, our strengths are our weaknesses and vice versa. I think generally, tourism stands for the process of change. Of course, in the tourism field, we're having a lot of discussions at the moment in terms of regenerative tourism after COVID. But we are also very aware of the advances of technology. And many countries are now on the verge.
Chris, would you please speak a bit louder? We don't hear you.
That seems to me to be a significant disruptor of our current society. Because 5G will permit the full function of the Internet of Things. And the faster speed of data transmission will stress, I think, that our current human-centered control systems. Because with faster transmission of data online, that will inform machine learning and artificial intelligence. And it may be that one of the first things that we will see this occurring is actually in transport systems. I think we think of Teslas as cars, but actually they're much more than that, because as the computer linkages grow over the Internet of Things, cars indeed will start communicating with each other. And of course, Elon Musk's dream is that the car drives for us, but the cars will communicate with each other. It may be that the first signs we'll see will be that we're on our road. But this is just a sign of things to come. The whole of the tourism system will become increasingly individual in nature. And one of the things that I've often wondered about is, of course, we enjoy tourism through our senses. But what happens when, in fact, the technology begins to fool us? And we're already seeing signs of this. Perhaps you've seen Sophia, the robot. But what experimentation is showing is that where people are being interviewed over Zoom or over television links, they're actually talking perhaps through a robot. And increasingly, time before the human realizes that they are not talking to another human is implying that, in fact, the robots and the artificial intelligence and the talk bots are actually beginning to push out And the thesis is smart tourism is going to, one thing I'm looking at the moment, that smart tourism in fact may mean that Butler's 1980 theory of tourist area life cycle might
I'm
well
sorry,
become-
Chris, would you please speak a bit closer to the microphone? We don't hear you properly.
So what of the future? Well, I always enjoyed reading, and I can still remember reading Michael Moorcock's novel, Answers at Time, which portray humans drawing on eons of data, which are fed to them by the technological linkages that exist at that time. And one of the comments that he makes is that, in fact, what once was thought of magic becomes a commonplace. And has already been noted, I'm talking to you now from New Zealand, on the other side of the world from some of you, but for our grandparents, that would have seemed like magic. But there is a question, what does the immediate future and the state mean for being human? Some of you might remember that in 2013, there was a film that was produced called Her, and Joaquin Phoenix played the role of Theodore. And Theodore had broken up with his former girlfriend, Catherine. He's feeling rather lonely, and he becomes increasingly attracted to his new operating system on his computer, a young lady by the name of Samantha. And he slowly falls in love with her. And then at one point he says, "How many people are saying I love you at this moment?" Now, I can't remember the exact figure, but she replies something like, "Oh, 3,481. And that is a turning point, because he then begins to realize that he is, in fact, just now part of the massive process, that he is indeed an individual. Of course, in true Hollywood fashion, he then returns to his former girlfriend. But I think that what this shows is the role of empathy. And I've now lost my screen, and I've lost it's what this shows is the role of empathy. And I think empathy in the terms of destination management planning is always about being able to place yourself in the shoes of the other person, or in, you said by some others today, in the culture of the other place. Now, Burgess has referred to the fact that in 2005, we produced this paper on intimacy. And I think very much we regard it as others. I think this is something that I've also become very aware of in other forms of research, and indeed with other cultures. And of course, at the moment, being in New Zealand, we're very aware of Maori culture and the way in which Maori operate and think. And for some reason now, I cannot get slide. There we go. So hopefully, if you were able to see this slide, it's a diagram that shows in fact the relationship on the left-hand side, the relationship between two individuals. And we talk about there the role of self-care and other care. And the intimacy comes when both parties are capable of producing empathy and understanding of each other through other care. Equally, as a tourist, I think we have to be aware of the places that we are visiting and the impacts that we have upon other people. Their ordinary is our extraordinary, and we begin to perhaps gaze in different ways, but we should always be aware that what we are leaving is, as numbers grow, a series of problems and overtures come into our system. So there is a caveat which I have thought about subsequently.
It's very hard to understand, to hear. Maybe something with the microphone.
Probably a healthy self-care, possibly a pre-breakfast for that care. The dysfunctional society, or the dysfunctional relationship, the one which destroys, of course, any attempt at intimacy, is where, in fact, both parties are so caught up in self-care. And that begins to create situations where overuse takes places, exploitative relationships, and things of that nature. Now, as I said, I've been very aware of the relationships of Indigenous peoples. And this is something that I think when you talk to them, they talk very much about relationships and identity with places, talk about the Safari, of their kaupapa, their relationships with land and with extended family networks. Now, currently, I'm advising work which is being done in the Philippines with one of my former students, and we're trying to get the area of the Bataan Islands to be recognized by the United Nations World Tourism Organization for purposes of becoming one of their observatories for monitoring. One of the things we did was we asked them about issues such as, what do you understand by the term home? What is important to you? What is important about this place? And here you see a pattern of their responses. You can see home for them is a place of love, it's a place of happiness, it's a sense of belonging, it's a place of peace, of comfort, and being with family. And I found this very interesting, because what is always interesting and what helps to articulate a discourse is also what is not said as much as what is said. And what is not being said about concepts and relationships place is any form of consumerism. There's no talk about having a better car, no talk of having a larger computer. None of those things apply. These are people, they are an indigenous minority in the Philippines, Thailand, and they see their relationships very much tied up with other people. And at the end of the day, I think that in fact is what intimacy is about. It is about, in fact, understanding, about appreciating the other, and about appreciating the contact we have with the other. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. As you gather, we have had some problems hearing you, and you came in and out.
Birgit, I can't hear you.
You can't even hear me. Can everybody else hear me? Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
So it must be because you're down under. You know, perhaps that's what it is. You're down under. But we have your presentation, Chris, and we can replay that at a later stage if we may. So thank you very much, Chris, for putting it together and bearing with us right at the other side of the world. Before I actually pass on to the next speaker, I would just like to welcome certain people that have also signed up here today, which Rita just advised me of. And I believe we have a presence of the Ministry of Tourism from the Maldives, also from the Tourism Board in Singapore, and along with that, with the European Sociological Association. So we have a various representation, and we're delighted that everybody's signed in to listen to this interesting topic today. So thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much again, Chris, and our apologies that this didn't work, but your presentation, of course, was very insightful again, and I have watched it before, and everybody else can watch it again online. Right, with that in mind now, let us head on to the next speaker. If I may invite Dr. Hazel Andrews to present her thoughts on intimacy, and her particular paper and thoughts will be very interesting and very relevant to today's time frame that we live in. Now, Dr. Hazel Andrews is the reader in Tourism, Culture and Society at Liverpool John Moores University, where she leads the Tourism, Travel, Culture and Heritage Research Group. As a social anthropologist, Hazel is interested in issues of identity, selfhood and the body, principally in relation to travel and tourism. Now, Hazel's PhD thesis was the first full-length ethnographic study of British charter tourists and involved periods of participant observation in the resorts of Palma Nova and Magaluf on the Mediterranean island of Mallorca. Hazel has drawn on her fieldwork to publish journal articles and book chapters. She is the author, editor of 9 books, including the monograph, The British on Holiday, Charter Tourism, Identity and Consumption, published by Channel New in 2011. And also her latest, yes, can you hear me? I cannot hear you. I cannot. Can you hear
We
me?
can hear you, Bridget.
You can
We
hear
can
you.
hear
You
you.
can
Thank
hear
you
you.
very
can hear
much.
you.
I wasn't sure whether someone was talking to me and interrupting. Now, I'll just go back to Hazel because she's got some interesting work that she can draw on that she would present. And the one I'm particularly interested in and actually contacted her about is Hazel's paper entitled Tourism and COVID-19, Intimacy Transformed or Intimacy Interrupted. It was one of 8 abstracts from 49 global submissions to be included as a feature article in a special issue on COVID-19 and intimacy for the Association of Social Anthropologists, journal Anthropology in Action, Journal for Applied Anthropology in Policy and Practice, 2020. Please, Hazel, if you would like to share your thoughts on this particular exciting topic.
Okay, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you, Birgit, for inviting me to be part of today, and also to Reza for organising the webinar. So as Birgit has already said, I'm going to be speaking about the paper that I wrote for Anthropology in Action, which was asking this question in a very broad sense about whether the global pandemic had changed how people were doing intimacy. Had it transformed it? And I thought about that from the perspective of tourism. And I've prepared something, so forgive me if I'm seeming to read a bit, but I do wish to keep to time as much as I can. So I'll be speaking about that. My overall argument was that people have long travelled in search of intimacy, and that we can think about this in much tourism activity. And although we are probably all familiar with what happened when the world was gripped by the main throes of COVID and lockdowns and so on, thinking about what changes COVID-19 might have brought to how intimacy is practiced, I argue in 2020, when I wrote the paper, it was probably too soon to do that because we were still experiencing the ramifications of the pandemic. And even if we were to think about how intimacy might be transformed, we couldn't necessarily say that this is down to COVID-19. So we've heard a number of definitions of intimacy, I think, already, but from my perspective, just to talk you through my thinking, before I get to the tourists, I want to just think about, how is intimacy defined? And as has already been pointed out, it is often related to sexual activity and the idea of privacy. But research in the 1990s by Lisa Register and Tracy Henley noted that there were, that in the academic literature, the idea of intimacy, the definition of intimacy was actually really complex, and there wasn't a single definition of intimacy. So to address this, they took a phenomenological approach and did some research to find out what intimacy meant to people in practice. And what they saw was that intimacy was not always sexual. It's not always about physical contact. It's not always about connections with other people, because people expressed views of intimacy with pets. And it's not always in private. Lynn Jameson, researching later in 2011, places a similar emphasis on the ways of doing intimacy. So the emphasis here is the practice of intimacy, and agreeing as well at the same time that there was no universal definition of intimacy. So Register and Henley's research revealed many different ways that people did intimacy. And so we can say that intimacy means different things to different people and is no means fixed in practice. So the idea that we could have intimacy transformed is a bit like this idea that we can damage culture in a way. It's an ongoing process. Things are always changing and developing, and people have their practice of intimacy in different ways. So that kind of speaking of transformation implies that intimacy is fixed, but I would argue that it's much more fluid. Mention has been made of the use of technology, and the work of Levon Soysel, writing in 2010, notes that because of the increased use of different media platforms, social media, that which was once very private, which we might associate with particularly sexual intimacy, is now much more shared in public. And so although the pandemic may have prohibited physical intimacy, our movements across boundaries, and crossing boundaries, I think is key to ideas of intimacy. It didn't wipe it out completely, because those things that we were used to using, or many of us were used to using, social media connections, were being used even more for working at home, for connecting with friends and family around where we live or different parts of the world. So we were still able to travel across borders. And it's an interesting reflection that when we think about the use of social media and various platforms and these ideas that at one time this crossing of boundaries and bringing the world closer together at the time of the pandemic were also being used to keep us apart. So we didn't have to, for many of us who could, we didn't have to go into work physically because we were able to work remotely. So we were able to be kept apart from other people. To come more to the tourism perspective, as far back as the 1970s, the relationship between going on holiday and engaging in sexual activity, that one form of intimacy, was identified. So, for example, the work of Swedish anthropologist Ulla Wagner, studying Swedish charter tourists on holiday in the Gambia, noted that many of the women went on holiday there in the hope of romance and a sexual relationship with the young men who made themselves available, hoping to find they could make some money from the visitors. So this kind of engagement, these sexual transactions between those we might describe as Westerners and the other of the tourist destination, exists elsewhere in studies of tourism. So, for example, the work of Susan Frolick in 2007 and Valerio Simoni in 2014 and 2015. And what all three of these researchers have in common is the idea that the intimacy between tourists and locals was largely one of a commodified sexual encounter. Other people have done, other researchers, some work, so Julia Harrison, for example, and Mary Conran, have noted that not all pursuits and acts of intimacy in tourism are based on sexual relationships. Harrison's work in 2003, Being a Tourist, also recognises that the practices of intimacy to which tourists are drawn is not always based on encounters between a Western and non-Western other. And that brings me more directly to my own research. So as Birgit has already outlined, my research has been amongst British tourists in Spain, on Mallorca. And the desire for intimacy is of no less importance to tourists in which the cultural other is not sought, but is rather eschewed in favour of expressions of intimacy in what I have described as a form of sexualised effervescent nationalism. So I conducted research in the form of participant observation with British tourists in the late 1990s on the Mediterranean island of Mallorca in both Palma Nova and Magaluf. But what I'm going to talk about now is principally Magaluf. And whilst I was doing this work, it soon became apparent why the resort of Magaluf had earned the nickname Shagaluf. For many, this is a colloquial term in British language that refers to the ability to have casual sexual relationships. So you can engage in sexual activity with somebody, you don't know them, and you never see them again. So for many of the tourists, the ability to drink copious amounts of alcohol and or engage in numerous casual sexual relations were amongst the resort's attractions. The reputation of Magaluf was in part premised on its representation in tourist brochures which emphasised the party atmosphere and alluded to the possibility of sexual encounters. Expectations and fantasies were thus created to be acted out in person once the tourists were in situ. And this was often encouraged, these practices of shagaloof, these casual sexual encounters and drinking too much, were often encouraged by those who attempted to mediate the tourist experiences. So tour operator representatives, hotel entertainers, and things like the practice of sexual position games as part of hotel entertainment, or tour operator organised bar crawls. These sorts of things would initiate invitations from complete strangers to return to a hotel or apartment room so that we could have sex, to quote one person, or to be part of a sandwich. These kinds of invitations, direct invitations from people I didn't know, were not unusual. So the highly charged sexual atmosphere of Magaluf took on a greater notoriety than it ever had before in 2014, when it was widely reported of a mamadding incident. So this refers to an event that took place in a nightclub in Magaluf, in which a young British woman, believing she was going to win a free holiday for her efforts, was videoed without her knowledge, without her consent, by one of the bar's workers giving oral sex to 24 different men. The holiday that she won for doing this was in fact a cocktail shot worth about €2, I think, at the time. The sharing of the video on Facebook drew much media attention from around the world. Given the moral panic that ensued and the overwhelmingly negative media headlines that resulted from the incident, the local municipality of Calvia, in which Magaluf is situated, started to introduce bylaws that were designed to reposition the resort with a different kind of reputation, to move away from shagaloof, to encourage a different kind of tourist. The kind of intimacy that Magaluf's shagaloof reputation relies upon speaks to a commodified sexual intimacy, but this provides only one facet of tourist practices of intimacy in the resort. If we were to return to Register and Henley's work, there are plenty of examples of other forms of intimacy that they identified that occur in Magaluf. Being in the presence of a loved one, awareness of someone not present, the non-sexualized body contact of rubbing in sun cream, holding hands, etc. Being surprised by someone, having time with those close to you. So when COVID-19 erupted onto the world, calls to build back better, do things differently were heard in many different sectors, including tourism. But to what degree had the pandemic changed the central logic of tourism and therefore questions of intimacy on holiday? Evidence from the summer of 2020, and I wasn't able to go to Magaluf myself to witness this, so this is from people posting to YouTube and other news media reports. But evidence in summer of 2020 showed that the behaviour of tourists to Magaluf not being much different, if at all, from what I had seen when I first went in 1997. It is the case that Magaluf is trying to change its reputation. Last autumn, they held a literary festival, trying to reposition themselves in the market. But many of these things have been enacted before COVID-19. So many of the new bylaws that tourists may be experiencing if they visit now were there before COVID-19 happened. So some of the changes to the more salubrious tourism activities and associated intimacies were enacted before COVID-19. Many of us will have noted before lockdown how we were already, when COVID-19 was beginning to be reported in the media, changing our habits and developing forms of social distancing. We rapidly learned not to shake hands in greeting, not to kiss or hug our friends when we met. But just as quickly as we learn, as news reports in 2020 demonstrated, so as quickly as we learn not to do these things, once lockdown restrictions were lifted and we were kind of given the all clear, we went back to hugging and kissing again and handshakes. So the market may emphasize a sexualized intimacy as a product they can entice tourists with, but that is not all there is to intimacy on holiday. To be intimate is, however it is defined or practiced, as Julia Harrison noted, intertwined with sociability, with being human. Tourism is a very human affair, and as such has intimacy running through it. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Hazel. I obviously read that paper about 3 times because there was such a relevant discussion that you obviously did in there, and just your presentation again summed it up beautifully. We all have reflected on the impact of COVID in many ways on the tourism industry. Are we going back to the old ways? Human nature? Possibly we do tend to go back to old patterns and habits, and nature drives us in certain ways. The human connection is still highly sought after, and I think when you relate it back to the technology impact and so forth, that was addressed by others as well. Your presentation just showed again, it's not transformed, it's possibly more interrupted. So thank you very much for that most insightful presentation. Thank you. If I may now ask, Sebastian and Xavier, would you be so kind to get ready? And I'll quickly introduce you both. Dr. Sebastian Philippe, I don't know if Philippe, yes, is Associate Professor and Assistant Dean at the School of Hotel and Hotel Management in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Philippe has an established international track record of research focusing on well-being and tourist experiences, primarily drawing from the field of positive psychology, a very, very present topic globally and outside the tourism field for sure. He is co-author of Tourism and the Good Life, Routledge 2011, the lead editor of Tourist Experience and Fulfillment Insights from Positive Psychology, Routledge 2013, and lead editor of Positive Tourism, Routledge 2016. His recent major works included studies of love and kindness in tourist experiences. Philippe is in editorial boards of multiple major journals in tourism, leisure, and hospitality fields. Now, Sebastian and Xavier are doing presentation one after the other or together, so I might just quickly introduce Xavier as well, if I may. So, Dr. Xavier Mathieusi currently works at the Fachhochschule in Wien and University of Applied Sciences in Management and Communication. He's also an adjunct faculty at other universities in Austria. Xavier holds a Master of Science degree in Tourism Management from the University of Surrey and a PhD from the Vienna University of Economics and Business in Austria. Xavier's work has been published in high-impact international journals such as Annals of Tourism Research, Tourism Management, Journal of Sustainable Tourism, and Leisure Studies. Yeah, Xavier is particularly interested in leisure and tourism's contribution to human flourishing and collective well-being. All notions of positive psychologies addressed outside the domain of tourism. His latest work has focused on the quality of human relationships, exploring the themes of love and intimacy. He is a member of the editorial board of Tourism Analysis, the Journal of Qualitative Research in Tourism and Consumer Behavior in Tourism and Hospitality. He regularly serves on a review of major tourism, leisure and hospitality journals. Apart from his academic activities, Xavier has also led European Commission-funded consultancy research projects on sustainable cultural tourism in Southeast Europe. With that introduction, may I please ask both of you to present your various thoughts on love and intimacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Birgit, and thank you, Reza, also for helping to coordinate the seminar. I will keep my section reasonably short so that Xavier can also have a say. Basically, a lot of the things I'm about to say have more or less been said by previous speakers. So you can treat this as kind of like a quick summary of some of the key points that we've already highlighted. Because of Sandra's background in positive psychology, one of the key things that I picked up on from her presentation is the importance of human relationships to health and well-being. I really can't stress that enough. Because I'm interested in and passionate about well-being research, I've really been delving into trying to understand various models, conceptions of well-being, and relationships feature very, very strongly. You know, there's abundance of research that on social relationships, both quantity and quality of social relationships really affect our mental health, physical health, mortality risk. And one of the issues that we didn't talk much about is that the opposite is also true. You know, the bad relationships can also be extremely detrimental to health and well-being. Bad marriages, for example, as opposed to good marriages, just to give you an example. And then, of course, the idea of loneliness as well. We know that loneliness, especially amongst elderly people, really is a major health issue. So this is my first point that I really want to kind of drive today. You know, the relationships, and I guess the reason why we're talking about this topic in the first place is that it's so fundamentally important to our health and well-being. The other point that I want to drive today is this idea of the current times and the topic that we're covering. And Hazel talked a lot about this. I would like to cite quite a well-known psychology professor, Leah Waters from University of Melbourne. Her and her colleagues recently stated the following: of the many challenges brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, undoubtedly one of the most common sources of distress beyond the existential threat of the virus itself is the disruption caused to our relationships. And then she goes on to say that the need to remain physically distant, you know, which will likely linger on, has really altered our intimate human relationships in ways that threaten to undermine our well-being and the well-being of many people across the globe. So, and I think this is an important statement that on one hand, we have this digital acceleration that we're witnessing, and people are connecting in some way through technology. But on the other hand, they're also escaping in technology, and I think moving away from each other. So this is really an interesting point. So the way I see it globally, that we have a bit of a problem in the sense that we have threatened relationships and diminished well-being at a global scale. So where does tourism fit into this story? Well, I'm an idealist, a bit like Birgit. So perhaps habitual travel, you know, could be one of the tools to help us manage some of these problems. But importantly, I think we need to rethink the way we view relationships and more specifically intimacy in tourism. And here I will agree with pretty much all the speakers up to now that the way we've framed intimacy is essentially sex and sexual adventures. There's also now a very well-developed stream in tourism on sexual exploitation, all of which is extremely important. However, you know, tourism is essentially about human connection, including but surpassing transactional relationships between service providers and tourists. We all know this, and including and surpassing sex and you know, flings during vacations. Do we know much about random acts of kindness in tourism and the value of those acts of kindness on individuals? KLM, and Talib might be interested in this, KLM actually not long ago had a brilliant campaign where they would seek out people on social media and then give them gifts at airports. And this generated a lot of positivity you know, amongst travelers. But I did a study with a couple of colleagues from the University of Waterloo on these random acts of kindness. And there were very powerful stories of people's technology not working at a destination and people simply needing help with directions or with different forms of challenges that they were dealing with. So there's abundance of research now in psychology, in positive psychology, that suggests that these random acts of kindness are extremely important to our health and well-being. But that's not what we're looking at in tourism. Yet I would argue it forms part of the discussion, or it should form part of the discussion about intimacy. And what about friendships? Do we know much about how friendships are affected in tourism environments amongst travel companions, or how new friendships may form in tourism? Or do we know how existing friendships may break in tourism situations? And then, of course, what about love? Love is kind of an overarching theme. We can put it above all of this, but essentially, again, love, once we've started looking at the literature on love in different disciplines, and in particular in psychology, because I've been drawing a lot from the discipline of psychology, is again, love framed in very narrow terms. So I'm not offering any answers, any quick answers, just some questions to get us thinking a little bit more. And now I'd like to hand over to Xavier.
All right, thanks, Seb. Thank you, Birgit, and everyone for having me here speaking on intimacy. I will basically report on a couple of projects that Sebastian and I we've been doing on friendship and love. So that's a smooth transition. There's something I wanted to also add related to what the first speaker said about trust. I think trust can be built through tourism and tourism experiences and being intimate with people, and and allows people to gain this trust. And we don't talk about trust in our research, Seb and I, but I thought we could possibly, when I reflect on that, I could possibly add this to as an outcome of intimate relationships through tourism. So anyway, back to what we did. Seb and I did some research on friendship a few years ago, and we looked at how same-sex friendship relationships unfold during a holiday. So we did some interviews with pairs of friends who had traveled together. And what came out of this research is that intimacy was a dominant theme, obviously, but in different ways. One interesting aspect was the intimacy of physical spaces. So some particular spaces had some qualities that led to to more proximity, to more intimate connections between people, and places, for example, such as tents, bedrooms, so confined spaces led to people interact more, open up, but also experience some challenges, because it's not easy to be with somebody in a confined space for some particular time. Conflicts may arise. So these conflicts could be overcome by the people there. So and overcoming challenges also led to some strengthening relationships. So intimacy of spaces was important for people to bond, to get closer to each other. And then, of course, intimacy was experienced in terms of talking, intimate talks. People share emotions, they disclose their, private issues. And then through these talks, intimate connections are built, and people learn about themselves, and they learn about other people, and they also experience self-actualization. I just thought about something. When you learn about yourself, then you become more intimate with yourself, right? So again, self-learning is a form of intimacy. And so that's pretty much what came out of this research on friendship. There's a few other things, but linking to intimacy in particular, these were the main themes. If I move to the other study that we've done more recently about love, we explored how a sense of love is experienced by diaspora tourists traveling back to their homeland. And of course, love and intimacy, as Seb mentioned before, are highly connected or intertwined. And what came out of this research was people felt very connected to their homelands. So it was very important for them to have an intimate experience with their homeland. And they could be intimate by working in nature, experiencing sensually places, so the smells, the sounds, the textures, and the colors of places, and they could get very close to these places. It gives people a sense of who they were, where they belong to. They could connect with people in those places, people that actually stayed there, and they would renew with these people. So intimacy was highly connected to places they had known for many years before they left the country, but also reconnecting with people. Again, social relationships. Yeah. So, and these intimate experiences with places and people, or people in places, spaces, led to some feelings of comfort, positive emotions, and again, they were very therapeutic in nature. So we've again talking about the same things as before, and I think if I can conclude, I would mostly think that what drives people to travel is not so much the appeal of some destinations. I think what lies beneath is really a need to engage with people, to connect with people, and to encounter people or re-encounter individuals, and this gives us some meaning in our lives. So that's pretty much what came out of our research on friendship and love. I hope I wasn't too long, so we can keep rolling. Thank you.
Thank you again, Xavier and Sebastian. It's fantastic again, as all the speakers and all our topics obviously align, and yet we bring in slightly different perspectives. And I think the positive psychology literature, of course, is extensive, and I've been digging into that over the last few years as well for that. And one thought that came to mind, the point you just made is, do we travel to really encounter others, or are we trying to encounter ourselves, our different identities, individual ones, because we are different in identity and what we want and what we need at various times. And at times we cannot be a certain person at home, but we can be that person when we travel. Touristhood comes to mind with Jafar Jafari, all these sort of themes, intimacy, how can we experience that under the guidance of, or the cover of Touristhood. Fascinating topic. Thank you very much for enlightening us on all of that. Need to catch up again with you. I quickly want to make one comment, and I don't want to forget that. I believe there are a lot of people online, and we'd like to really extend our thanks and gratitude for everybody being present here today. Obviously, it's a topic that touches everyone, not just in travel and tourism, but in everyday life, because we travel through life, and what we talk about in travel and tourism is just as relevant, and vice versa in daily life. So thank you very much for everybody being present here. With that in mind, I think you sort of linked to the next presenters, if I may say so. Again, the discussion of place and connection, intimacy with place. Yes, before I forget too, I believe there are a lot of people on Facebook and YouTube. So please, hello everyone there. Welcome, and stick around. Don't go. There's a lot more to come. The next presenters, if I may introduce, is Elizabeth and Katja. Now, I'll quickly introduce Elizabeth first, and then they can go into their discussions, their topics. Again, it builds on what we've talked about already. Professor Elizabeth Kastenholz is Associate Professor at the Department of Economics, Management, Industrial Engineering and Tourism at the University of Viero, where she teaches tourism and marketing related subjects since 1994, also integrating the university's research unit, governance, competitiveness and public policies, and serving as a director of the PhD program in marketing and strategy. She holds a PhD in tourism studies, an MBA in license, I cannot say that now, my linguistic skills have left me, in tourism management and planning, and a bachelor in public administration, specifically foreign affairs in Germany. She's a member of the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Tourismuswirtschaft and of the Portuguese Society of Rural Societies or Studies. Now, if I may go straight into Katja, because they are presenting together, similar to you, Sebastian and Xavier. Dr. Katja Laura Sidali is associate professor in the area of economics and rural appraisal. She obtained her PhD in international cooperation and policies for sustainable development at the University of Bologna, in co-tutelle with the George August University of Göttingen, Germany, in 2009. Member of the editorial board, advisory board of the following scientific journals: International Journal of Culture, Tourism and Hospitality Research, Journal of Global Business Insights, International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, and the International Hospitality and Tourism Student Journal since 2012. Lots to explore, a lot of bios. Please go online onto the webinar if you want to find out more about everybody here today. If I may give you the stage, Elizabeth and Katja, all yours. I don't think I can hear you, Katja.
Sorry.
That's it.
Now, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Birgit, for this invitation. I'm particularly happy to be here, and I think the same for Elizabeth. And it's important, it's particularly relevant that that you are leading this webinar, because actually we wrote together an article which got quite famous, but everything started from your articles, that the articles that you wrote with Chris Ryan, where when you started to introduce the intimacy approach into tourism. So thank you really again. I work at the agricultural economics side, and I have worked also a lot with food and wine tourism. So this is the link, let's say, with intimacy. Briefly, the main ideas is that the more globalized get the food and wine chain, the greater is the need for intimacy relationship. Also with something which could be such trivial because we eat every day. So even with something like food. But if you pay attention to the dynamics of world agricultural markets, actually we can see a continuum from the one side, a very anonymous way to present food. I have nothing against discounter, but food discounter show us a food without, let's say, a face. And from the other side of the continuous, we see a very personalized food, which is the food that, for instance, is offered directly in a farm. I remember one of the first speaker, Arndt, he is also a colleague from Germany. He spoke about the trust boxes. Well, I have seen the trust boxes also in an Austrian farm. So the box where you can, the farm shop where you can go, the farmer is not there, because we know farmers are very busy working on the field. So he's not there. You can pick up your tomatoes, you can pick up your milk, a liter of milk, and you just pay what you think it's a fair price. So, and it's, as Arndt said at the beginning, is something that make you immediately very comfortable because of trust, what Arndt said at the beginning. So trust, intimacy are very bound together. And in order not to speak only on food or wine, I would like to finish with a very short anecdote, finish before giving the word to Elizabeth. I have experienced this also in China when I was invited to a conference. So I was sleeping in a 5-star hotel, a wonderful hotel in Shanghai. But there happened something that broke the trust. And what was it? It was actually a very funny anecdote. You know, you can decide to put the sign not to disturb outside the door of your room. And I put this sign because I had all my papers. I was a PhD student, so I had all my papers on the bed in order to learn the mental sequence of things that I wanted to say on the conference. And when the roomkeeper came and asked me to prepare the room, to clean the room, I said, no, it's not necessary, thank you. And then she came again with the boss of the hotel, and they asked me again if they could make my room, clean my room. And I repeated very honestly, no, please don't, because I have all my documents. And so tomorrow, it is not necessary. I just came yesterday. Okay, they said yes, of course. And then when I came back from the conference, my room was cleaned. All my papers were put in on the table, and the hotel manager let a letter where he said that my request was so strange that he took the liberty to clean the room. And if I had some complaints, of course, I could speak with him at the main office, at the reception. And I remember I felt really bad because I saw that there was no trust. So trust and intimacy are really bound together, as Anne said. And also this is also the case for food and for wine. And of course, this brings also the discussion to food and wine tourism. Please, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again, Birgit, for this very inspiring webinar. I've been following everything with quite enthusiasm, and it's also well linked together. So it actually resonates a lot of what we have been discussing and researching also in our rural tourism and food and wine tourism agenda. And intimacy is something very much related to rural tourism. It's, I think it is very much at the core. I have been studying rural tourism in Portugal now for more than 20 years. And what we can actually find is that people, although they do not actually go in the first place for a kind of a community experience, they very much enjoy it when it happens. And we have done quantitative and qualitative research and asked travelers as well as the local residents. And I think what perhaps I could add to the present discussion here is the view of the local residents. In particularly 3 interior villages that we have studied in in North and Central Portugal that are actually subject to depopulation and a lot of problems, aging populations. We had residents be so enthusiastic about the visitors who come and to actually talk to them and share with them experiences that they eventually say that without tourists coming, without travelers coming, they would be definitely more lonely and even die earlier. That's what they say. So I think that it's something really essential, this connection that we can get, these relationships that we may develop. And what came also out of our research was that the relationships are the better, of course, the longer people have the chance to stay and the more genuine the encounters are. And meal sharing, for example, also was a very important issue here. And it's not only about meal sharing in restaurants, but even at home or in places where local community also socializes more. Having these kind of more genuine encounters definitely adds both to the travelers' quality of the experience and to quality of life of the local residents. So I think that is also something that we can retain from our studies. It is something so essential to both. And if we have these kind of host-guest encounters, we may actually be able to create more sustainable tourism, especially in rural areas. Relationships that can continue, that eventually lead to place attachment also of the visitors. And some of those visitors actually come back again and again. And it's not only those emigrants that also Xavier talked about, and it's an important phenomenon also in the rural areas in Portugal, that you have this nostalgia tourism, people who have lived in these areas and come back and want to keep their connection, but also people from other countries, from originally different contexts, that feel so welcome in these rural areas, in these villages, that they actually come back again and again and create these deeper connections, and are actually interested in continuing to purchase local products, local wines, and keep the whole local economy actually also functioning. So all in all, it can be a very interesting win-win situation that can be triggered through these kind of interactions. Thank you.
Oh, we don't hear Birgit.
Birgit. Thank you. Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you for that. Thanks both of you again, knowing your research, of course, into that whole context of rural tourism and the connection between host and guests. And, you know, here we're talking about intimacies between tourists, but also hosts and guests and place and so forth. So intimacy is with places, with people, with others, the host, but also the tourist. You're spanning the whole spectrum there again. Thank you. Again, it just feeds into one or the other. If I may just interrupt for 1 second and just say thank you very much to all the people who are present here while we are discussing this amazing topic. Firstly up, there is actually there is Professor Leonid Petrov, I believe, is present here. So thank you very much, Professor, for that. Also, we have Miss Abia Abu Sulaiman from Saudi Arabia, which is who is the first Saudi or woman tourist guide in Saudi Arabia. As we know, tourism is developing hugely in Saudi Arabia, very exciting, and the women really getting involved. Having worked in Dubai with purely Emirati ladies and knowing the importance of all of that, I'm excited to hear that and excited to see this lovely lady here present also today. So thank you very much for your presence. On to the next speakers, if I may. Thank you very much again for your insightful reflection there, and going back to the history way back in 2013 when your paper was published. Next speakers, let me just have a look who's there, and I can see the faces. There's a couple more speakers left, and next one would be Michael. You there, Michael? Yes. Whereabouts are you? Can I see you at all? Anyway, Michael, I introduce you very briefly. Dr. Michael Humbrock joined Surrey University as a lecturer in 2018, shortly after his PhD, which he also completed here at Surrey. Previously, Michael earned a master's degree in applied cultural analysis within the Department of Ethnology at the University of Lund in Sweden. Michael has worked on multiple research projects that have centered around migration, tourism, and health. These projects have covered topics such as the role material objects play in creating a sense of belonging for migrants. I think you just alluded to migrants there as well in your talk, Elizabeth, in your rural destination development. The ethical implications for stem cell tourism he has also been involved in, and how digital technology in visiting friends and relatives, mobilities contribute to changes in migrants' personal relationships. Michael also has experience and a keen interest in conducting applied research. So with that introduction, Michael, would you like to do us the honor and share your thoughts with us? Not sure, can I see you? I cannot hear you at all. Can you, where's Michael?
I don't see him.
You don't see him either? He's left us in the UK, but the looks of it, he's not there. What a shame, because that topic would have linked in beautifully with your presentation there, of course, Elizabeth and Katja. But well, perhaps he will come back later again, and we take advantage of that should he come back on screen. We have then one more speaker left, and that is Dimitra in Athens. I know that you are here, Dimitra, waving. So let me introduce you quickly. The topic, of course, that I left you to last is a nice one because you talk about love, but you talk about self-love, which has arisen previously, positive psychology and the notion of all of that, and also the destination love concept, which already has been alluded to by the other speakers. So let me quickly introduce you. Dr. Dimitra Margarita Likodi holds a PhD in tourism marketing, and she is an adjunct lecturer of tourism marketing at the University of Piraeus, as well as a visiting lecturer at the Agricultural University of Athens. To date, she has contributed to the tourism marketing academia with studies in international journals, publications, book chapters, and also has a solid participation in international conferences of marketing, such as the European Marketing Academy Conference, where she is also a member. Her academic interests focus on destination marketing, destination experience, emotions in tourism, hence the topic of intimacy and love, and more specifically, destination love. So if I may give the stage to you, Dimitra, we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about love towards destinations. My thought when I started my PhD was how do tourists define destination love? And there was not a universal definition of destination love in the literature, and this was exactly my research interest to study it. And of course, I let tourists free to articulate about love towards destinations and how exactly they define it or they feel about it. And they had in mind their most favorite destination for vacations. So I will share my presentation, and I hope that it will work. One moment. Can you see it? It's okay?
Yes, it's beautiful. Thank you. I can see it.
Okay.
We can hear you. Great.
So, my topic is destination love, and the theoretical basis of destination love is of course psychology and sociology, marketing and tourism. So the theoretical basis of tourism, of course, all know that emotions play a focal role in all stages of travel, and consumer decisions and actions are much more based on emotional responses that stimulate their hearts, and this is specifically true for services. And love is the strongest, most intense and complex emotion one may experience. But despite the unprecedented recognition of the fundamental role of love in marketing, only very recently tourism academics focus their attention on love towards destinations. So far, academic investigations of love in tourism use already entrenched love conceptualizations or scales, and are destination specific because all the papers about destination love are about destination brand love. They are specific. So the main research gap was that marketeers need to think about love not within a specific product category or brand, but the entire universe of brands. And love, we have published one paper about self-love, which is one of the dimensions of destination love. And love for a particular destination alone should not be perceived as the end game. Since the concept of destination love emerges stronger and richer by adopting a universal perspective, surpassing all manner of particular destination brands and entrenched conceptualization in other fields or contexts. So the gap was that destination love, we should see destination love as a universal concept, not destination specific, as well as theoretical and empirical investigation of destination love are totally missing in the literature. One moment. So I found 7 dimensions of destination love. We did 3 separate studies. The first one was based on interviews. The second one was a mix of open-ended written questions and, of course, closed questions. And the third one was via questionnaires. So the 7 dimensions, as you can see, are emotional solidarity with locals, self-love, anthropomorphism, self-destination integration, passionate romantic behavior towards the destination, long-term relationship with the destination, and positive emotional connection with a destination. So here you can see the dimensions and their definitions. For example, self-love. We define self-love as the achievement of the transformation and confirmation of ourselves, the richest achievement of well-being, and the deepest experience of self-actualization and fulfillment. And you can see all the definitions of all the other dimensions of love here. And for the first 2 studies, and I take as an example self-love, we found that in study 1, the gender was predominantly women who developed self-love, whereas in the study 2, both women and men developed self-love. You can see the age is the same, middle age, the education, master graduates and PhD graduates, to both studies. Marital status, mainly singles. The singles develop self-love. As you can see, their monthly income is very high. And of course, they are repeat visitors of their beloved destination. And about nationality, mainly tourists from the US and Europeans develop self-love. And here on this slide, I show you some examples of how tourists define self-love. For example, a female from the UK, 36 years old and master graduate, defined destination love as love for Greece has also to do with discovering myself. It inspires me to be a better person and to find out more about myself. And also you can see a male German, 57 years old with a PhD and philosopher. He described destination love. You can see love for Athens. Love is diving into knowledge, achieving self-actualization and fulfillment. Greece is my inspirational source of knowledge. And you can see all the other examples here. And afterwards, we made the segmentation based on nationality and all the subcategories of destination love. For example, you can see here that people from Germany mainly develop anthropomorphism, emotional solidarity with locals, and long-term relationship with destination, whereas Dutch develop anthropomorphism, emotional solidarity with locals, and positive psychological states. And I have also the segmentation based on age. And as you can see here, the older ones, 56 years old or more, develop nostalgia and frequent thoughts, anthropomorphism, emotional solidarity with locals, and intuitive fit with the place. And here you can see many examples based on the demographic characteristics and which destination love dimensions each segment develops. So the results of this study can be generalized since the model stems from a great variety of multicultural respondents in 3 independent samples and a universal research approach concerning multiple destinations across the world so that it adds to the robustness of the findings. Concerning the nationality of the participants, it cuts almost uniformly across all destination love constructs, apart from Scandinavians. Participants of all age ranges displayed types of love towards their most favorite destination, but individuals of age 15 to 18 years predominantly did not display destination love. Older individuals tend to develop love towards destination, and this could be explained by the fact that human growth is associated with adult maturity and that higher motives or complex emotions are felt or are stronger for older versus younger adults. Men and women from different cultural and ethnic settings seems to have similar destination love perceptions, and thus they are analogous to the findings of Doherty and colleagues' study about love. And the majority of destination lovers are of high monthly income. Education might be one of the demographic variables to distinguish destination lovers. Students and people of basic education tend to love in a lesser extent their most favorite destination compared to the highly educated segments. And this finding is consistent with that of other researchers who postulate that a more educated individual would potentially have psychological access to more advanced and more committed relationships in different contexts. So the academic implication, our study builds emotion and relational theory in the field of tourist marketing because it is the first in tourism to perceive destination love as a universal and thus as a broader concept than destination brand love. And this study contributes to this identified gap in the literature by adopting and providing a broader love research stance, which incorporates the complex, universal, and tourism-specific nature of love. And of course, its destination love dimension could be perceived as a standalone theoretical construct of love. And about managerial implication, our model can help tourism professionals in targeting segments that develop and fill destination love dimensions via effective and relevant marketing strategies to enhance tourist meaningful experiences. For example, about emotional solidarity, increasing opportunities for local tourist interaction at key destination attractions, planning special local events and festivals, and creating an online active destination community on social media could enhance and facilitate tourist locals interaction all year round. And about human characteristics, tourism experts could work upon reinforcing their destination brand image or slogans by implementing human characteristics such as a heartwarming, lovable destination. Destination managers could create self-hired needs activities and slogans which inspire and encourage tourists to visit the destination, or they could create active self-lover destination groups on social media with the aim to encourage tourists to interact, and mainly intellectually. And destination presence at emotionally meaningful events, such as tourism exhibitions and travel festival, can be organized in the countries of self-lovers. And of course, this study built the socio-demographic and behavioral profile of tourists who develop its destination love dimension, as well as destination love as a whole concept. Provide tourism experts with a segmentation framework that could help them identify the market segments that are more possible to develop love towards their destination, and subsequently give them insights into effective methods to successfully target and position their destination in the mind and hearts of destination lovers by designing their marketing strategy. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, it would be my pleasure to answer them.
Thank you, Dimitra. Again, it's an interesting topic, isn't it? The notion of self-love. And being Greek, of course, I would imagine you would draw on the philosophical background of the 7 words of love in Greek. Yes. That actually also encompasses self-love, which is philanta, which of course has an interesting perception, interpretation of self-love versus selfishness, etc. Interesting notion when we talk about front stage, backstage, and trust. But it's another topic for another seminar, perhaps webinar. I believe another speaker that fell off the earth a minute ago, it's Michael. Michael, are you back again? I believe you're back.
I just talked to him and he said he couldn't get the link and he's coming. But
he's coming. He's got his running shoes on.
He's just getting. Okay.
Okay, wonderful. Again, very insightful that transition from, the sort of sociological perspective into psychology and ending up with the self-love and destination love, where we bring together the whole notions of love. And I believe actually, Seb, you've been into that as well, love and the realization that the 2 major love, if we look at a dichotomy, is passionate love and companionate love, and how that impacts the relationship motivation, but also relationship between people, but also relationship between people and place. I think that's the topic that we haven't really expanded on because of the time frame, I guess. Hopefully another seminar or webinar with you on that one. I look forward to that. So how are we going, Riza? Is Michael there again?
Yes, he's here.
Okay, wonderful.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, excellent. Good stuff. We wouldn't have wanted to miss out on your presentation again, because again, it relates to the notion of migrants and sense of place and on all these sort of things, how we as human beings interpret intimacy. And I love your terminology that you talk about is anticipation intimacy.
Aspiration.
Sorry, aspiration. Yeah, sorry, I always mix them up. Aspiration it is. You will elaborate on that, no doubt, in a minute. Thank you for that. I'll quickly introduce you again. Michael has worked on various projects, and as he just said, his major paper that I was really interested in, and you will elaborate on aspiration intimacy, that's terminology I hadn't come across. Perhaps you would like to tell us more about it.
Yes, absolutely, Bridget. I'm going to share my screen. Is it okay to share my screen?
Hopefully it worked for you and didn't for me.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay, can everybody see that?
That looks
Okay.
good.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Well, hello everyone, and thank you to Brigitte and Reza for organizing this. I'm very pleased to be here. I've never got the chance to participate in a webinar focused exclusively on intimacy. So this is really great for me. I'll talk a little bit about some snippets from the paper that Brigitte was talking about called Aspirational Intimacy in Visiting Friends and Relatives, which is built on my work around intimacy and migration and how migrants maintain relationships with their friends and family using digital technology and visiting friends and relatives tourism. But before I do that, I just want to briefly put this in a broader context of a sort of origin of interest, what brought me to intimacy and how I started getting thinking in that. And I'm sure, as with probably a few people here, that will start with Anthony Giddens. So it was his work, sort of, what drew me to him was him combining globalization and intimacy in terms of thinking about how we're becoming more aware of our social environments, and this is giving us increased choice in relationships, perhaps moving away from more traditional understandings and roles of what intimacy could be, and also how, though that does come at a bit of a cost, the increased choice does tend to increase risk and anxiety a bit in terms of how we take the weight of our choices in our relationships a bit more. And also Zygmunt Bauman. So Bauman agrees with a lot of what Giddens had to say, but introduced this aspect of mobility into it that was really important for me. So his main idea, or one of the main ideas he has, is that the more people are moving away from where they grew up, so for domestic or international migration, this is having the effect of fragmenting our relationships. So we are becoming ultimately more disconnected as we move abroad or move domestically as well. So while I do think, I always thought that Bauman was overly pessimistic about everything he was saying, their combined work in how globalization, intimacy, and mobility were coming together really raised the question for me of, I'm not sure you guys can see this, of how are relationships and maintaining relationships after moving being affected by those movements, and how is that sort of affecting the quality of our relationships. So that was what really came to the foreground for me initially. So as I started to try to look at the literature around from tourism and migration, this question was approached still trying to reinforce the importance of traditional kinship and moral understandings of intimacy. So, when we visit our friends and family, we spend a lot of time with family. Family comes first, and we spend a lot of time at home versus where with friendships, it's more about, it's perhaps less important. And when we do spend time together, it's more about consumption, these kinds of ideas. And that really physical proximity is still the most important aspect of intimacy. Being physically together is still dominant. And well, I certainly don't want to, diminish the importance of kinship and friendship in terms of moral understandings, but I do think that there is a sort of, we need to explore how globalization is affecting intimacy in different ways. And so that leads me to try to point to how I think intimacy is not only based in moral relations, but is aspirational in nature. And by that, I mean, that's how we sort of develop in everyday life our relationships around a shared sense of feeling and hope and emotion around the possibilities for our relationships, and also the possibilities of our own desires of what we can be through our relationships, which I think is really key. So I just want to share briefly some of the sort of main insights in a slice of my work that I've been doing, and hopefully it comes across very clearly. So one of the key things that was coming through when I was working with Italian migrants in London and how they maintain relationships with digital technology and visits with friends and family abroad was this sense of anxiety that was underpinning relationships. First, in how migrants, before they were leaving, what was motivating them to move was how their relationships were sort of contained or had aspects that they felt were really not positive about Italian culture, whether that was gender roles or risk aversion. And they felt very uncomfortable about how these values were embedded in their relationships that played a role in them moving abroad. But at the same time, they were also very nervous about losing connections with key people as they moved. While at the same time, migration was also provoking a sense of anxiety against non-migrants, where it started to provoke feelings of, okay, what am I doing with my life? Is this what's going to happen to our relationship? Should I move abroad? And it created this sense of how what I think normal relationships can feel very inauthentic. What should be viewed as a normal sense of intimacy can feel quite strange. In contrast to that, though, as people moved abroad and developed relationships after migration, people kept going back to the same thing. Why this relationship is important is not because my mom's doing her duty of coming to visit me. It's because when I'm with these friends or family, there's this unspoken sense of connection. My mom knows me. She knows when something's wrong, even when I don't have to say it. We just have this feeling of connection that tells me that our relationship is alive. And this gave them a real sense of hope that they could last after this big change from migration. So in that sense, I think that the actual disruption of migration can feel very authentic, where the strange can feel very real. But it wasn't enough for people, I think, to just be hopeful about their relationships. People wanted to see that they were mobilizing that hope in ways that would overcome certain obstacles, and that they could see that they were changing together. Okay, so when people were coming to visit them in London, I can see that my best friend here is adapting. She wants to go to this exotic restaurant in London. My mom is completely adapting to my new life. And we are starting to change together. And that was very important for people because that allowed them to think about how they could develop their own aspirations for themselves through their relationships, whether that be in relation to retirement plans. It could relate to a lot of different hopes they had for their life, for migration generally. But what was then very clear was how this was playing out in everyday practice of how people, this sense of unspoken connection and feeling was linked to how people could move between different forms of technology, from Skype to email to WhatsApp. And the relationship just sort of felt like it was sewn into the daily routines of everyday life, where you could just pick up your relationship at another moment of contact, and it never really had this sense of interruptedness. And then how that tended to become connected to the entwinement of holiday cycles. So, summer holidays, Christmas, Easter, all these sorts of things where all of their holidays were increasingly becoming intertwined. So they would talk about how this makes me feel the relationship is real, it's alive, it's going to last. This relationship is going to last because I can feel that I'm just moving from one point of contact to another and it's never interrupted. And that gave them a sense of, well, that will allow me a new future for us. I mean, my mom is now regularly part of our life. My child is starting to know the grandma. I'm going to be able to take that holiday I never get to take because I'm very busy in London, and I can leave my kid with grandma, that kind of thing. So just a few points I want to emphasize to take home with. Number one, I think it's what you can take from this, I hope, is that the effective experience of intimacy is very important in guiding migrant relationships, not just a sense of moral duty. But that doesn't mean that this distance is necessarily some new moral norm itself, where it's the right thing to do to live at a distance. There's always this underwritten sense of anxiety, but hope for permanent, authentic intimacy at the same time. And so in that sense, I think I can emphasize that change to intimacy comes via that hope for stability. I mean, we need to feel that our relationships are real and stable in order to learn how to make changes in them. And that actually distance, VFR tourism, and digital technology, which are often viewed as sort of almost exotic ways to maintain relationships, I think when, as they become sewn together, these actually help migration feel very normal and very authentic. But it's not, again, it's a very subjective feeling of what that authenticity is. So the last point I would say is that I think that to me points to how tourism is really, really important in managing some of those anxieties of change that come with migration and the sort of anxieties that underpin the possibilities for migration, by providing hope that those intimate futures are coming about. So I hope I stayed within the limit there, Brigitte. That's all I've got for you. I'll stop sharing now.
Again, what can I say? It's a wonderful conclusion, actually, to the presentation of intimacy, and I'm sure all the listeners and all of us present here have enjoyed that conclusion. It's an interesting notion, that whole aspect of migration, because I'm regarded globally by all my friends as a nomad, and here I am again. I've been on the go since I left Australia 2020. Before that, I worked around the world in different universities with my children here and there, my son in Germany, in Bremen, my daughter in Sydney, and I've just been in a cruise ship, das Raumschiff, for 4 months around the Mediterranean, a month in Germany, and now I'm back in Greece. Where do I fit in? I do not know. Where are my affections? Where are my intimacy, feeling of sense of place, sense of belonging? I feel very connected to the people, feel very much connected to the place, the culture, and the food, the music, everything else. So personally, going through that and having listened to your final conclusion there, after the notion of self-love, which is again also interesting to see. I call this my beloved Naxos, with a good title for that. So love and intimacy, again, they're actually different terminologies. We didn't go into that, and I believe there is a distinction that we should draw on. You know, I believe intimacy is more a bonding perspective, what we do in action, while love tends to have more the notion of feelings and emotions. And I always ask people, if they talk about intimacy and love, I said, what do you do for love? How do you show love? Show me what you do for intimacy. What kind of intimacy can you demonstrate so that I feel loved, or a place feels loved? So that's just my concluding statements here. Fantastic. I'm just so happy that we all got together. I think, as far as I'm concerned, I could listen for hours and have a real discussion going on here. Perhaps we can run another webinars, I don't know, but what the future might bring. If there's any questions that anybody has amongst ourselves, I guess, but also anybody who is online, if you would like to just put your hand up, I think Reza will let you in, and then we can take it from there. Anybody ready to ask questions or type it in? I know there was a lot of beautiful information, wasn't there? I made notes, but just almost too much. Okay, an interesting hot topic.
Yeah.
Any comments that might come from colleagues having listened to each other? I'm full. I'll have to go and digest it when I go for a walk in a minute. Anybody else wants to elaborate on intimacy and love? Not at the moment. So much to it. We could have dinner, conversations for months, which I had last night with Art. Of course, we had a long 2-hour dinner conversation. Trust was a biggie.
So if you don't mind, Brigitte, I just technical issues. So everything is recorded and will be online in the coming hours, including the profile of the speakers and everybody. So it's like a magazine vibes on the tourismwebinar.com, and you can see that and share it, and it will stay there permanently. Also, thank you so much, Brigitte, for organizing this. She has done an excellent job and a hard work. She has been very busy with many days, I know, with that. So thank you so much. Thank you. I don't know if somebody else has any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course, thank you all the excellent speakers. Yeah.
Bye.
It was a great webinar. Thank you so much from all around the world joining us early or late evening. Thank you.
Hope to catch up with you all somehow or other. Have a wonderful weekend. And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Katya. Marinida. Georgia, still there as well. Stephanie.
Thank you very much.
Kathy is also there. Yes.
Yes, from Indonesia.
Ah, lovely. Yes.
Borneo.
Beautiful. Yes. Thank you for joining.
Yes.
What?
Nice tourism seminar Borneo. I like sustainable tourism in industry. Yes. I know.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Very nice.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.